Somewhere right now, someone is picturing it. A small shop on the corner, exposed brick maybe, and the hiss of a steam wand first thing in the morning. Regulars who don't even need to say their order anymore because the person behind the counter already knows it. Owning a coffee shop is one of the most common daydreams in modern life. Not because coffee is glamorous, but because the life around it looks simple, warm, and entirely yours. And on the surface, the math looks almost too easy. A bag of coffee beans costs a few dollars, a carton of milk costs even less. Turn that into a $5 or $6 latte, sell a few hundred a day, and it looks like one of the most profitable small businesses a person could start. That's the brochure version. It isn't the version that shows up on the shop's bank statement 3 years later. Here's the strange part. Plenty of coffee shops are busy. Lines out the door most mornings, a loyal crowd of regulars, glowing reviews online, and many of those same shops are barely breaking even, quietly losing money every single month. So the real question isn't whether people will pay for coffee. Clearly they will. The real question is where all of that money actually goes once it hits the register, and why a full shop and a profitable shop aren't always the same thing. By the end of this video, you'll understand what it really costs to open and run a coffee shop, where the money quietly disappears before it ever becomes profit, and why two shops that look nearly identical from the sidewalk can end up with completely different financial outcomes. Start with the obvious question. What business is a coffee shop actually in? The instinctive answer is coffee. That's what's printed on the receipt after all. But look closer, and a coffee shop behaves less like a beverage business and more like three businesses stacked on top of each other. It's a real estate business because location decides almost everything before a single cup is poured. It's a labor business because a trained barista working quickly is the difference between a profitable rush and a losing one. And it's a habit business because the real value isn't the drink itself. It's convincing the same person to walk through the same door most mornings of the week. It's the part almost nobody accounts for when they picture running one. Before any of that habit building can begin, though, someone has to open the doors, and that costs considerably more than most people expect. Industry estimates for a small independent coffee shop typically range from around $80,000 in the low end to well over $300,000 on the high end, depending on the city, the size of the space, and how much construction the location needs. A shop moving into a raw, unfinished unit will cost far more to open than one taking over a space that already had plumbing and ventilation built for food service. That number tends to surprise people, mostly because they're picturing the visible half of it, the espresso machine, the furniture, the sign above the door. The visible half isn't actually the expensive half. A serious commercial espresso machine alone can run anywhere from several $1,000s to well over $20,000, and that's before the grinders, the refrigeration, the water filtration system, and the point-of-sale hardware. Oddly enough, that machine sitting behind the counter, the one every customer sees, usually still isn't the biggest expense in the building. The bigger costs are the ones nobody photographs for opening day. Plumbing and electrical work rated for commercial equipment, health department permits and inspections, ventilation systems, sometimes required by code before a single drink can be legally made, and enough cash held in reserve to survive the first few months, because very few new coffee shops turn a profit right out of the gate. That last part ends more coffee shop dreams than any single piece of equipment. Owners spend so heavily preparing to open that they leave almost nothing in reserve for actually staying open. So the shop opens, the sign goes up, regulars start finding their way in. This is where the economics get genuinely interesting, because a coffee shop doesn't really sell one product. It sells a narrow window of time, repeated constantly. The average transaction is small, typically somewhere in the $4 to $7 range, which means profitability was never about the size of any single sale. It's about volume, speed, and repetition. That's why the morning rush matters so disproportionately. A shop might do more business between 7 and 9 in the morning than in the rest of the day combined. Miss that window, whether from a slow machine, an understaffed counter, or a line long enough to discourage people from waiting, there's no equivalent surge later to make up for it. It's also why the smartest owners stop relying on coffee alone. Pastries, bagged beans, merchandise, catering, loyalty apps that pull people back for a second visit. Each one exists to squeeze a little more revenue out of a customer who was already walking through the door anyway. There's a reason any of this works, and it isn't really about caffeine. A cup of coffee is one of the easiest luxuries a person can justify. It's small enough to not feel like a real expense, routine enough to become part of someone's identity, and social enough that the shop becomes less about the drink and more about the few minutes of normalcy built around it. That's a powerful thing to sell. It's also very easy for an owner to take for granted. Now for the part most new owners underestimate the most. what it costs just to keep the lights on every month, regardless of how many drinks get sold. Rent is the obvious one, and it behaves a little strangely. A location visible enough to generate steady walk-in traffic usually costs more, which creates a real tension. The rent that guarantees customers is often the same rent most likely to erase the profit those customers generate. Labor tends to be the bigger number, though. Making espresso drinks quickly and consistently is a real skill, and skilled baristas need to be trained, scheduled, and paid around a shop's uneven daily rhythm, busy for 2 hours, quiet for 4. Across the food and beverage industry, labor commonly accounts for somewhere around a third of total revenue. Then there's the cost of the coffee itself, along with milk, cups, lids, syrups, and food. Individually, each ingredient is cheap. Added up across every drink sold every day, that cost typically lands somewhere between a quarter and a third of revenue. Add rent, labor, and ingredients together, and a shop can be spending 80 cents or more of every dollar it earns before it even reaches insurance, utilities, equipment maintenance, or the small fee a credit card company takes on every tap and swipe. But that's only part of the story, because none of those costs are actually the ones that close coffee shops. Those are the predictable ones. It's the invisible ones that do the real damage. Milk spoils. Pastries baked this morning are worthless by tomorrow. An espresso machine breaking down on a Saturday doesn't just cost a repair bill, it costs an entire morning of revenue while customers walk to a competitor instead. Staff turnover in food service tends to run high, which means a shop is almost constantly retraining someone, and every undertrained employee behind the machine slows down the exact rush the business depends on. There's also a slower, quieter risk that rarely gets discussed. Rent doesn't stay still. Leases renew at higher rates in neighborhoods that become more popular, which means a coffee shop can become a victim of its own success, attracting enough attention to a block that the landlord raises the price of staying there. And hanging over all of it is competition that didn't exist on opening day. A chain moving in 2 blocks away doesn't need to be better. It only needs to be closer, faster, or cheaper on the one morning a regular customer happens to be running late. So if the costs are this unforgiving, why do some coffee shops thrive for decades while others quietly close within a year or two? It rarely comes down to the coffee itself. It comes down to discipline in the parts of the business that never make it onto the menu. The owners who last tend to schedule labor with real precision, matching staff to the actual rhythm of foot traffic instead of guessing. They negotiate rent terms carefully before signing, not after struggling. They build more than one way to earn from the same customer, instead of depending entirely on the drink in that customer's hand. There's also a decision many new owners face early on: build something fully independent or buy into an established coffee brand. Going independent means full creative control and the potential for stronger margins if the shop works, but no name recognition to lean on, and every mistake is a mistake nobody has already solved. Buying into a recognized brand hands over a tested system, supplier relationships, and instant recognition in exchange for franchise fees and ongoing royalties that quietly take a slice of revenue before the owner ever sees a cent of profit. Neither path is automatically the smarter one. It depends on how much certainty an owner is willing to trade for upside. Let's put real numbers next to all of this, using a simplified version of a small coffee shop's year. Say the shop brings in $600,000 in revenue over 12 months, a reasonable estimate for a steady, well-located independent shop. Ingredients might take around $165,000 of that, labor closer to $190,000, rent somewhere around $50,000. Add insurance, utilities, card processing fees, marketing, and equipment maintenance, and another $100,000 or so disappears. Add it all up, and roughly $505,000 of that $600,000 is already spoken for, before loan payments on the money it took to open the place and before taxes. What's left is somewhere around $95,000. Once the loan used to open the shop gets paid down and taxes are accounted for, the amount the owner actually takes home for a year of 7-day-a-week work can shrink to something closer to $40,000 or $50,000. That's assuming nothing goes wrong. No broken machine, no slow month, no sudden rent increase. The dream from the beginning of this video is still real. A coffee shop can absolutely become a life someone loves running. Independent shops do thrive, sometimes for decades, becoming the kind of place an entire neighborhood organizes its mornings around. But the version of the dream that survives isn't built on the coffee. It's built on someone who treats rent, labor, and small daily inefficiencies with as much serious as they treat the flavor in the cup. Because those unglamorous numbers repeated every single day decide far more of the outcome than the coffee ever does. The coffee was never really the product. The product was a few reliable minutes of somebody's morning, sold thousands of times over. And the owners who understand that tend to be the ones still standing behind the counter 5 years later. If there's another business or asset you'd like to see broken down like this one, let us know in the comments. And if you enjoy uncovering the hidden economics behind the things people dream of owning, consider subscribing.